People online often joke that Honor is Huawei's golden child. In this video, we're going to take a look at how much of the Huawei Pura 90 Pro Max's imaging prowess the Honor Mate X4 Pro actually has, and how much Huawei has really passed down to Honor. These two phones are in a very similar price range, so I think comparing them is fair. Let me start by saying, if I had to choose between these two phones for daily use, I'd definitely go with the Honor. The Honor has a better processor, better battery life, runs cooler, and feels better in the hand. But when it comes to the feel, some people prefer flat screens, while others like these quad-curved displays. Personally, I prefer the feel of the Honor, so all things considered, it's also much cheaper. And overall, the Honor is definitely the better choice. So, I'd like to take this opportunity to advise many loyal Huawei users. You might want to consider Honor. Honor's system is actually quite similar to Huawei's. It has that same familiar, reliable feel, and it's very stable. The features and everything else are quite similar too. So you shouldn't even have any trouble adjusting to it. Well, the price point might not be at the tier you were hoping for. If you happen to be like me and you're searching for a truly premium, expensive phone, for instance, that's an entirely different story. Anyway, enough of that talk. Let's get straight into their camera performance. Alright, let's jump straight into the camera comparison between these two phones. Starting with the ultra-wide angle, Honor's is actually a bit wider than Huawei's. I think Honor did a really great job with this. However, since Honor lacks that 25 megapixel sensor, it definitely loses out in terms of resolution. At the same time, when it comes to light handling and glare suppression, Huawei still does a slightly better job. And the main camera is exactly the same. Let's look at the 2x crop. I think Honor performs better than Huawei in this scene. Huawei has a bit too much noise in the shadows, and the overall sharpening looks a bit odd. Many areas aren't handled well, whereas Honor is relatively better. Now let's look at the mid-telephoto lens. One is 3.7x, the other is 4x. There is still a clear difference in the pixel count. Now let's take a closer look at 10 times. At 10 times, both of them are 12 megapixels. The gap isn't as wide as it was before, and in some areas Honor actually performs even better. Take the small text on this cabinet, for instance. Honor manages to capture it, while Huawei just smears it out. Now if you look at a 30x zoom, it's about like this. The difference between the two really isn't that significant. Let's take another look at this scene. In this flower-filled setting, the viewfinder shows a significant difference between these two phones. However, the captured shots aren't as different as you might expect. Clarity is obvious at a single glance. The Huawei main camera is sharper, while the Honor has a much higher level of color saturation. This is the mid-range zoom performance, and this is 10 times zoom. These are the macro shots that I captured from both of these devices. The Huawei is actually capable of getting even closer, but I just didn't bother taking any more shots. Now, let's take a look at the high resolution mode. For high res, both phones need some time to process, and the Huawei takes a little bit longer, but in reality, the Huawei's results are actually much better. Now, let's take a closer look at the main camera's performance. The gap isn't as significant as it was with the ultra-wide, but Huawei still comes out on top. Next, let's check the 200 megapixel results. At 200 mp, the difference between these devices is quite minimal. Huawei applies extra smoothing to noise and fine details. Let's look at complex lighting scenes. This is the ultra-wide angle. Huawei is still clear. The main camera, also due to the 25 megapixel count, is still clearer on the Huawei. Then at 2x, the gap at 2x isn't that big. Huawei's performance at mid-range focal lengths is slightly better. Then both at 10x, Huawei is still a bit better. Up to 30 times, if it actually hits 30 times, I think that is, well, probably just about it. Let's take another look. When it comes to extreme night ultra-wide shots, there's really not much difference between the two. If anything, the Honor actually feels a bit better. I should mention that in the viewfinder, the Huawei is actually much clearer than the Honor. The Huawei's viewfinder is really good at night, but the actual photo doesn't turn out as well as the Honor's. Then there's the main camera. It's pretty much the same in this scenario. Moving on to the telephoto lens, we find that Huawei's image noise is really quite harsh, whereas the Honor device manages to keep things looking relatively much cleaner. This particular shot was captured using the dedicated telephoto lens. You can easily tell that by looking at the aperture settings. Now let us take a closer look at the 10 times zoom. Both devices switch over to the telephoto lens once you hit 10 times zoom. Honor is clearly performing much better in this specific instance. Do you see that? That is how the photography quality compares. Overall, Huawei remains the better option, although Honor is quite impressive in certain scenarios. Let's take a look at the video performance of both. When it comes to video performance, to be honest, there's a difference right from the ultra-wide angle. I initially thought the ultra-wide angle would be about the same, but it turns out Huawei's clarity is actually significantly better than Honor's. You can pause the video to take a look. In this regard, Huawei has really made huge progress. You can also pause the video to check the main camera's performance. For the sky in the distance, the Honor doesn't adjust until it's out from under the bridge, while the Huawei keeps it perfectly exposed for the entire duration. Honestly, the Huawei is just so much better than the Honor is. Let me take another look at the medium to long focal length performance. Since the focal lengths are different, it's a bit of a comparison, but overall, they're both pretty good, with Huawei being slightly better. The camera movements are all looking really quite good. Now, when we are talking about the 10x zoom, I have to admit that Huawei is actually quite a bit better than Honor. Honestly, there is really nothing else that needs to be said about that particular point, I suppose. In my personal opinion, after carefully comparing all of these different scenarios, the main thing that Honor is currently lacking in terms of photography is that 25mm mode. Since most other brands already have it, I think Honor really needs to catch up on this feature. I mean, it really shouldn't be that hard for them to implement, right? If the device actually includes that feature, the overall image clarity will be improved in a very significant way. And when we move on to the subject of video recording, I have to be honest, there is still a very noticeable gap between them. However, the progress that Huawei has made with their video recording capabilities this time around is absolutely massive. Honestly, I really didn't think much of Huawei's video recording in the past, but recently Huawei's video recording, especially on this Pura 90 Pro Max, has seen improvements that are truly worthy of praise. I hope they keep it up. As for other Android brands, especially Xiaomi, I want to specifically call them out. A few years ago, Xiaomi's video recording was far ahead among domestic phones, but now it has no advantage left at all. I really hope that Xiaomi can focus a bit more of their attention on their smartphones. Building cars is important, of course, but the phone market is a vital stronghold that you simply cannot afford to lose.